Football has a way of becoming more than just a game. For most people watching from the outside, football is entertainment. It's touchdowns, rivalries, stadiums, draft pick, NIL deals, and the highest reels. But for the athlete living it every single day, football slowly becomes identity. And that's where things can become dangerous when the game ends. One of the hardest realities college football players face is this. Most of them will never play another meaningful snap after college. Not because they weren't talented, not because they didn't work hard, not because they didn't sacrifice enough, but because statistically, only a very small percentage make it to the NFL. And nobody really prepares athletes emotionally or psychologically for what happens when the dream stops. You spend your entire life chasing something. Your schedule revolves around football. Your friendship revolves around football. Your confidence, your structure, your purpose, your future, all connected to football. People know you as the athlete. Then one day it's over. No more practices, no more meetings, no more game days, no more structure. And for many athletes, that silence becomes extremely difficult to process because the pain isn't just losing the game. The real pain is losing the version of yourself you became attached through the game. A lot of people underestimate how deeply football shapes an athlete's psychology. From childhood, athletes are praised for performance. People celebrate them because they're talented. Coaches rely on them. Teammates respect them. Crowds cheer for them. And over time, without even realizing it, football stops becoming something they do and starts becoming who they are. That's why transition becomes so difficult. Because when football ends, many athletes are left asking themselves a question they've never seriously had to answer before. Who am I without this? And honestly, that's terrifying for a lot of former players because football gives them something most people spend their whole lives trying to find clear purpose. In football, everything is structured. You know where to be, you know your assignment, you know the mission, you even know what success looks like. There's urgency, there's accountability, there's brotherhood. Every day feels meaningful because everything is connected to a larger goal. Then suddenly, real life shows up. And real life is far less structured. Nobody hands you a playbook for identity after football. Nobody tells you exactly who you are anymore. And for athletes who build their identity entirely around performance, that transition can feel emotionally overwhelming. What many former athletes are actually experiencing after football is grief, but it's a type of grief most people don't recognize. They're grieving the locker room, the routine, brotherhood, adrenaline, anticipation, their purpose. And what makes this difficult is that society often expects athletes to just move on. But psychologically, it's not that simple. Because when something becomes deeply attached to your identity, losing it affects the mind at a very deep level. That's why many former athletes spiral silently. And spiraling doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like isolation. Sometimes it looks like sleeping all day. It may look even like consistently replaying old highlights. Sometimes it looks like losing motivation, becoming emotionally numb, or struggling to commit to anything new. And one of the hardest parts mentally is comparison. Watching former teammates make it to the lead while your journey ends can create internal conflict. That's hard to explain. Even if you're genuinely happy for them, part of your brain still wonders, why not me? What happened? Did I fail? Was all of this pointless? Those thoughts become dangerous when athletes sit with them long enough without support, guidance, or direction. One of the biggest reasons former athletes struggle after football is because football provided emotional intensity. Athletes become conditioned neurologically for competition, pressure, adrenaline, and urgency. Game day becomes more than an event, it becomes an emotional and psychological experience. So when football disappears, normal life can suddenly feel painfully quiet. And many athletes mistake that quietness for lack of purpose. But what they're often really experiencing is a nervous system that becomes conditioned to intensity. That's why some former athletes struggle to adjust to ordinary life. Regular jobs may feel boring. Normal routines may feel unstimulating because nothing feels like Saturdays under the stadium lights. And if athletes don't understand what's happening internally, they can start chasing things to recreate that emotional intensity. Sometimes it's partying, sometimes it's reckless behavior, times it's gambling, and also it's unhealthy relationships. Sometimes it's consistently trying to stay attached to football in an unhealthy way. Not necessarily because they're irresponsible people, but because the brain is desperately searching for significance again, searching for identity again, searching to feel alive again. One of the most dangerous mindsets athletes can develop is believing their value is tied to achievement. And sports culture unintentionally reinforces this. When you perform well, everybody celebrates you. You feel important, needed, valuable. But when performance stops, the attention often disappears too. And for some athletes, that emotional shift feels like abandonment. The phone gets quieter, people move on, the spotlight disappears, and many athletes internalize that belief that says their worth disappeared with it. That's where things can become emotionally dangerous because now purpose becomes conditional. I mattered if I made it to the lead, if I stayed relevant, if I'm still viewed as important. But when identity is built entirely on performance, emotional collapse becomes almost inevitable whenever performance ends. And this is why some athletes remain mentally stuck in football years after they stop playing, not physically, mentally, because they generally don't know who they are outside of the sport. Healing after football starts with understanding this. Your life did not lose value because football ended. That's foundational. Football may have been a major part of your story, but it was never supposed to be the total of who you are. And that realization takes time because many athletes have spent years attaching their entire identity to one dream. So healing starts with separating identity from occupation. You played football, but football is not all you are. And once athletes begin understanding that, they create room to evolve because purpose after football usually doesn't appear overnight. It evolves slowly. Some athletes discover purpose through mentoring young players, some through coaching, and others business, leadership, ministry, entrepreneurship, family, or helping other athletes navigate transitions. And often their greatest impacts happen after the game. But many never discover that next purpose because they remain emotionally trapped trying to resurrect a former version of themselves. And honestly, one of the hardest parts of transition is grieving honestly enough to move forward, not suppressing the pain, not pretending it doesn't hurt, actually acknowledging that chapter meant a lot to me, that dream mattered to me, that loss affected me. Because once athletes stop running from grief, they finally create space for growth. So let me speak directly to former athletes for a moment. If football ended for you and you feel lost, you're not weak, you're not broken. You are navigating identity transition. An identity transition is one of the most psychologically difficult things a person can experience, especially when your life revolved around one mission for years. But your story did not peak in college. Your value did not expire because the pads came off. There is still purpose in you. There is still leadership in you. There is still impact in you. But many athletes stay emotionally stuck because they keep trying to become who they used to be instead of discovering who they can still become. And that's the real transition, not just leaving football, but allowing yourself to evolve beyond it. Because football may have been the platform, but it was never meant to be your entire identity forever. One of the most important things athletes can understand is this: the discipline, sacrifice, resilience, leadership, and mental toughness football gives you. Those things did not disappear when the game ended. The field changed, that's all. And sometimes the very thing that feels like the end actually becomes the beginning of discovering who you truly are. Some athletes spend years trying to hold on to a former version of themselves because they think letting go means failure. But evolution is not failure. Transition is not failure. And purpose does not disappear just because one chapter closes. Sometimes the hardest transition in life becomes your very thing that reveals your deepest purpose. And for many former athletes, life after football is not the end of meaning. It's the beginning of discovering a deeper one. I see you next time on Beyond the Field.